The chipped paint on the windowsill felt rough under my fingertips, the layers like geological strata of summers past, each one a different shade of peeling white, a testament to Dad's aversion to hiring professionals. "Elbow grease and a little patience, that's all you need, Mayor," he'd say. Except patience was the one thing that never stuck around this house, especially not now. Downstairs, the muffled thump of gospel music vibrated through the floorboards. Mama's way of battling the silence that had swallowed us whole since Tuesday. Tuesday, when they found Clara, or what was left of her anyway. The official report called it an accidental drowning in the quarry. But Clara hated water, always had, said it made her skin crawl. I pushed myself off the sill, the old wood groaning in protest. My reflection stared back from the grimy windowpane, a pale ghost with my sister's 2 wide eyes and a tangled mess of dark hair that hadn't seen a brush in days. I looked down at the crumpled photograph in my hand, its edges worn soft from nervous fidgeting. Clara, grinning, sunlight catching the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, her arms slung around a skinny, awkward me. We were maybe 10, 11 in the picture, taken during that one family vacation to Myrtle Beach, a lifetime ago. The music downstairs abruptly cut off, replaced by the sharp clatter of pots and pans. Mama's nervous energy always manifested in frantic cleaning. I shoved the photo into my pocket and headed down the creaking stairs, the scent of bleach already stinging my nostrils. Mama was at the sink, scrubbing a skillet with the ferocity of someone trying to erase a sin. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face puffy, but her movements were sharp, almost violent. "You should eat something, Mayor," she said, her voice hoarse, not meeting my eyes, not hungry. The words felt like sandpaper in my throat. She slammed the skillet onto the drying rack, the sound echoing in the too-quiet kitchen. "You haven't eaten since," she trailed off, unable to say the word. "Since they murdered her, Mama," I said it for her, the rawness of the word burning my tongue. She flinched, turning away, clutching the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Don't say that, Mayor. It was an accident. The police said the police are wrong." My voice was flat, emotionless. It was the only way I could hold myself together. The only way I could keep the scream clawing its way up my throat from escaping. "Clara wouldn't go near that quarry, you know that." Mama just shook her head, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know anything anymore, and that was the truth. None of us did. Except maybe Clara, and she wasn't talking." A sharp rap on the front door startled us both. Mama jumped, pressing a hand to her chest. I went to the door, peering through the peephole. It was Sheriff Brody, his face grim, hat pulled low over his eyes. My stomach twisted. He hadn't come to offer condolences. Not this time. I opened the door, the porch light casting long shadows across his weathered face. "Sheriff, Marilyn," he nodded, his gaze shifting past me to where Mama stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, mind if I come in?" "What is it, Sheriff?" I asked, blocking his path. Something in his demeanor set my teeth on edge. He hesitated, then sighed, pushing his hat back. "We found something, Marilyn, down by the quarry. Thought you should see it." "See what?" My voice was barely a whisper. He held up a small plastic bag. Inside, nestled amongst the evidence tags, was a silver locket. Clara's locket, the one she never took off, the one with the tiny, engraved forget-me-nots. But it was the locket that made my blood run cold. It was the scrap of paper tucked inside it, barely visible through the translucent plastic. A scrap of paper with a single word scrawled across it in Clara's familiar, looping handwriting. *run. Mama gasped, a choked sound escaping her throat. I stared at the locket, at the word, my mind reeling. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. And Clara, somehow, even from the grave, was trying to tell me something. Sheriff Brody shifted uncomfortably. "We're still investigating, of course. But we thought it best, Toto, keep you informed." Informed? I snatched the bag from his hand, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic. "You think this is about keeping me informed?" My voice rose, sharp and brittle. "This is proof, Sheriff. Proof that someone did this to her, and they are still out there." Brody's face hardened. "Now, Marilyn, let's not jump to conclusions. Don't Marilyn me," I snapped. "You didn't listen to me before. You called it an accident. You closed the case, but you were wrong. You're all wrong." Mama finally found her voice, a shaky plea. "Mayor, please." I ignored her, My gaze locked on Brody's. "I'm going to find out who did this to her, and when I do, God help them." Brody sighed, weariness etched on his face. "Just stay out of trouble, Marilyn. Let us handle this." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "Some things are better left buried, you understand." He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked away, the porch light catching the glint of his badge. I watched him go, the plastic bag clutched tight in my hand. His words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat, a confirmation of everything I'd suspected. They had buried the truth alongside my sister, but they didn't know how good I was at digging. I turned back to Mama, who was watching me with a mixture of fear and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "He's wrong," I said, my voice low but firm. "We're not going to let them bury this. We're going to find out what happened to Clara, and we're going to make them pay." Mama didn't say anything. She just nodded, her eyes glistening in the dim light. It was a silent pact, forged in grief and fueled by a growing rage. We were going to unearth the truth, no matter the cost, even if it meant digging our own graves in the process. The locket felt heavy in my hand, a cold, hard weight. *run* Clara had written, but I wasn't running anymore. I was hunting. The first thing I did was call Danny. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy, laced with that perpetual layer of exhaustion that seemed to cling to him like cigarette smoke. Danny worked nights at the mill, a soul-crushing job that paid just enough to keep his beat-up Mustang running and a roof over his head. A roof he shared with a rotating cast of stray animals and even stray people. Had been Clara's well. Nobody really knew what to call Danny. Boyfriend was too simple. Friend didn't cover the way he looked at her. He was just Danny, and Clara had loved him, fiercely, protectively, in the way she loved all broken things. "She's gone, Danny," I said, the words still feeling foreign and clumsy in my mouth. There was a pause, a rustling sound like he was sitting up, fumbling for a cigarette. "I know, Mayor, heard it on the scanner. Damn cops." He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. "They say it was an accident, right? That's what they're peddling. They found her locket, Danny, by the quarry, with a note." Another pause, longer this time. A note, what'd it say? "Run." He inhaled sharply, the cigarette catching. "Run? Run from what? Who? That's what we need to figure out." My voice was hard, resolute. I could almost feel Clara standing beside me, nodding her head, urging me on. "Can you meet me, now, at the diner?" "Yeah, all right. Give me 20. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a cracked vinyl booth at the back of the Starlight Diner, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee that tasted like regret. The diner was practically deserted. The only sounds the low hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic clink of cutlery from the short-order cook. A woman named Betty Hood, seen more heartbreak and late-night confessions than any priest. Danny slid into the booth opposite me, looking even more haggard than usual, his eyes bloodshot, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles. He smelled of smoke and stale beer, but there was a sharpness in his gaze that belied his exhaustion. "So, this note," he began, leaning forward, his voice low. "Clara left you a note." I slid the plastic bag across the table. He picked it up carefully, his fingers tracing the outline of the locket through the plastic, his face tight. He read the note, his jaw clenching, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "This ain't right, Mayor. Clara, she wouldn't just drown. And she wouldn't just leave a note like this without good reason. She was scared of something, or someone," I corrected. "Sheriff Brody practically told me to drop it. Said some things are better left buried." Danny snorted. "Brody's a company man, always has been. He's in somebody's pocket, you can bet on it." "Whose pocket?" I asked, frustration simmering in my chest. This town, this whole damn county, felt like a spiderweb of secrets and unspoken alliances. "That's the million-dollar question, ain't it?" He tapped the bag with his finger. "So, what's the plan?" "We start digging," I said, echoing my thoughts from earlier. "Clara wouldn't leave us a clue this obvious if she didn't want us to find something. We retrace her steps, talk to people she knew, find out who she was afraid of." Danny nodded, a grim determination settling over his face. "All right, where do we start?" We started with her job. Clara worked part-time at the local library, shelving books and helping old ladies with the computers. It wasn't glamorous, but she loved it. Said it was quiet, peaceful, a refuge from the noise and chaos of our lives. Mrs. Henderson, the head librarian, a formidable woman with a bun as tight as her lips, greeted us with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She clearly didn't approve of Danny's appearance, her gaze lingering on his ripped jeans and faded tattoos. Clara was a good girl, she said, her voice clipped. A hard worker, always punctual. We were all very shocked by what happened. Did she seem worried about anything lately, Mrs. Henderson? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Did she mention anything unusual, any problems? Mrs. Henderson pursed her lips, thinking. She did seem distracted the last few weeks. A bit on edge, but she wouldn't say why. Just brushed it off, said she was tired. Did she have any visitors, anyone she seemed uncomfortable around? Danny asked, his gaze sharp, scanning the room as if expecting someone to jump out from behind the bookshelves. Mrs. Henderson hesitated. Well, there was that man, came in a few times asking for her. Big fella, looked like he'd spent too much time in the sun. Drove a beat-up pickup truck, always parked at the far end of the lot like he didn't want to be seen. Did you get his name? I pressed. No, he never gave it. Clara, just her face would go pale whenever she saw him. She'd hurry to the back, tell me to say she wasn't available. Then he'd leave, but he always came back. A beat-up pickup truck. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Danny and I exchanged a look. We had something to go on. Our next stop was the quarry. It was a desolate place, a gaping wound in the earth, surrounded by scrubby trees and piles of gravel. The water was murky, stagnant, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, and something else, something metallic, acrid, that made my stomach churn. We walked the perimeter, scanning the ground, searching for anything out of place. The police had already been here, of course, but they'd been looking for evidence of an accident, not a murder, and they hadn't known Clara like we did. Danny found it first, a small, trampled patch of wildflowers hidden behind a clump of bushes, overlooking the quarry. Clara loved wildflowers. She'd always stopped to admire them, even the smallest, most insignificant ones, and she would not have trampled them carelessly. She met someone here, Danny said, his voice low, his eyes narrowed. Someone she didn't want to meet. We searched the area more carefully, and that's when I saw it, glinting in the sunlight, half buried in the dirt, a small, silver button. It was just any button. It was a uniform button, the kind worn by the security guards at the mill, where Danny worked, and where half the town depended on for a paycheck. My heart sank. This was bigger than I thought. This wasn't just some random act of violence. This was connected to the mill, the lifeblood of our town, the place that employed my father before he died, the place that Danny hated with a quiet, burning passion. We need to talk to someone at the mill, I said, my voice barely a whisper. No, Danny said, his hand gripping my arm. Not yet. We go poking around the mill, they'll shut us down. They'll bury us just like they buried Clara. We need to be smarter than that. He was right. Going head on against the mill would be suicide. We needed to be strategic, gather more evidence, find out who we could trust, and more importantly, who we couldn't. We needed help. That's how we ended up at Rosie's Bar, a smoky dive on the edge of town, a place where secrets were currency and loyalty was bought and sold with a shot of whiskey and a $20 bill. Rosie herself was a force of nature, a woman with a gravelly voice, a heart of gold, and eyes that had seen too much. She'd been friends with our mama for years, had watched us grow up, had bailed Danny out of more scrapes than I could count. If anyone knew the underbelly of this town, it was Rosie. She listened to our story, her face impassive, her gaze steady. When we were finished, she took a long drag from her cigarette, exhaled a plume of smoke, and said, "So, the mill rats are playing dirty, huh? Not surprising. They've been getting away with murder for years. We need to find out who at the mill was messing with Clara," Danny said, leaning forward, his voice urgent. "And why?" Rosie nodded. "I got ears everywhere, kid. I'll see what I can dig up. But you two gotta be careful. Those mill boys, They don't take kindly to people snooping. Rosie's words echoed the unease that had been gnawing at me since we found Clara's locket. This was just about finding a killer. It was about ripping open the festering wound at the heart of this town. The mill was a god here, and its disciples were everywhere, and we were just two people, armed with grief and a fading photograph, daring to challenge it. We crashed at Danny's that night, a cramped, cluttered shack on the outskirts of town that smelled of motor oil, dog hair, and something vaguely medicinal that I suspected was Danny's attempt at self-medicating. We spread the few clues we had on his kitchen table: the photograph of Clara, the locket, the silver button, a hastily drawn map of the quarry area marking where we found the trampled flowers. It was not much, but it was a starting point. Danny paced, restless energy buzzing off him like static. "We need to get inside the mill," he said, his voice tight. "Find out who wears those uniforms, who was on shift the day Clara." He trailed off, unable to say the word. "It's too risky, Danny," I said, pushing a stray strand of hair out of my eyes. "Rosie's right. They'll be watching us now, waiting for us to make a move. We need a different angle." He stopped pacing, turning to face me, his eyes dark with a mixture of grief and rage. "What other angle is there, Mayor? They killed her, and they think they can just get away with it because they own this town." "We use what they don't expect," I said, my gaze meeting his. "We use their secrets against them." I thought of Mr. Henderson, the taciturn man I'd tattooed last month. The one who'd let slip a few too many details about his gambling debts and the loan sharks who frequented Rosie's back room. I thought of Sarah Jenkins, the mayor's secretary, who'd come in for a delicate rose tattoo on her ankle, but couldn't hide the tremor in her hands or the dark circles under her eyes from a sleepless night spent arguing with her husband. People always talked when they were under the needle. The pain, the intimacy of it, it loosened their tongues, made them vulnerable. It was my currency, my weapon of choice. "I'm going back to the shop," I said, standing up. "I'm going to start fishing." Danny frowned. "Fishing for what? And how are you going to do that with the cops probably breathing down your neck?" "I'll be careful," I said, grabbing my worn leather jacket, "and I'll be fishing for information. People tell me things, Danny. They always do. Especially when they think they're in control." He hesitated, then nodded, his jaw set. "All right, but I'm going with you. I'll keep watch. And if anyone gives you trouble," he didn't finish the sentence, but the look in his eyes said it all. The tattoo shop felt different that night, colder, more exposed. I flipped on the lights, the buzzing neon sign in the window, casting a lurid glow on the empty street outside. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every passing car a potential enemy. Danny positioned himself near the back, a shotgun head pulled out of some hidden compartment in his Mustang, resting across his lap, his silhouette a grim sentinel in the dimly lit space. I started small, reaching out to my regulars, the ones I knew had connections, the ones who owed me favors. It was a slow, painstaking process, a delicate dance of coded language and veiled threats. I tattooed a snarling wolf on the forearm of a biker known for his loose lips, subtly steering the conversation towards the mill, towards the security guards, towards anything that might connect Clara to the place. He didn't give me anything concrete, but he planted a seed, a whisper of a name: Hicks. A supervisor at the mill, apparently known for his temper and his heavy hand. The next day, I tattooed a delicate butterfly on the shoulder of a waitress from the Starlight Diner, a sweet girl with a sharp memory. She remembered seeing Clara a few weeks ago, arguing with a man in the parking lot. A man in a mill uniform. She didn't recognize him, but she remembered his truck. A beat-up pickup, she said, with a rusted tailgate and a distinctive dent in the driver's side door. The same truck Mrs. Henderson had described. The pieces were starting to come together. Later that afternoon, Rosie called, her voice low and urgent. "I got something, kids," she said. "Hicks, the supervisor you asked about, he's been acting skittish lately, drinking more than usual, even for him, and I heard he's been making some big deposits at the bank, cash money. Way more than his paycheck. "Where does he live?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Out by the lake," she said. "Little cabin off the beaten path. But be careful, Mare. Hicks is not playing around, and he's got friends." We went that night, Danny and I, driving through the darkness, the headlights cutting through the fog that clung to the winding roads. The air was thick with anticipation, a suffocating blend of hope and dread. Hicks' cabin was small, dilapidated, tucked away in a grove of trees overlooking the lake. There were no lights on, but a thin plume of smoke curled from the chimney. We approached cautiously, Danny leading the way, his shotgun held ready. He tried the door, it was unlocked. We slipped inside, the silence heavy, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a few worn chairs, a table covered with empty beer bottles, a cot in the corner. It looked like the temporary hideout of a man on the run, and then we saw him. Hicks was slumped in an armchair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the floor beside him, his eyes closed. At first, I thought he was passed out, drunk, but as we got closer, I saw the blood, staining the front of his shirt, the crimson pool spreading on the worn rug beneath him. He was dead, and pinned to his chest with a hunting knife was a photograph, Clara's photograph, the one from Myrtle Beach. Danny cursed, his grip tightening on the shotgun. Damn it, they beat us to him. Now we'll never know, but I wasn't looking at Hicks. My gaze was fixed on something else, something barely visible in the dim light of the fire. A small, leather-bound notebook lying on the table beside the whiskey bottle. It was open, and on one of the pages, scrawled in a shaky hand, was a list of names, and at the top of the list, underlined twice, was a single name, *** Lockwood ***. Lockwood. The name hung in the air, heavy with significance. Everyone in this town knew Lockwood. He owned the mill. He owned half the businesses in the county. He was a pillar of the community, a philanthropist, a friend to the sheriff, a man who could make or break anyone with a single phone call. And if Hicks was working for him, if Hicks was involved in Clara's death, a cold dread washed over me. We weren't just dealing with a crooked supervisor, a few dirty cops. We were up against something far bigger, far more powerful, far more dangerous. We were fighting a ghost, a shadow that stretched across the entire town. "We need to get out of here," Danny said, his voice tight, his eyes scanning the windows. "They'll be coming back. They'll know we were here." He was right. We were in over our heads, but we couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not after we'd come this far. Not after Clara. I grabbed the notebook, stuffing it into my jacket. "We're not going anywhere," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "We're going to finish this. We're going to make them pay." Danny looked at me, his face pale, his eyes full of a mixture of fear and admiration. "You're crazy, Mare. You know that, right? They are going to kill us." "Maybe," I said, meeting his gaze, "but at least we'll go down fighting." The next few days were a blur of fear and adrenaline. We moved from one safe house to another, relying on Rosie's network of contacts, always one step ahead of the shadows that seemed to be closing in around us. We copied the names from Hicks' notebook, poring over them, trying to find a connection, a weakness, anything that could give us leverage against Lockwood. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, a game of chess against an opponent who knew all our moves before we even made them. We discovered that Lockwood was deeply in debt, his empire teetering on the brink of collapse. He was desperate, willing to do anything to protect his power, his reputation, and Clara, somehow, had.